The calluses of the soul. How repeated compromise changes what you can feel. In Mr. Stick's framework, Finance Psychology, most people think their greatest danger is making one catastrophic decision. It usually isn't. Most lives are not destroyed in a single moment. Most lives drift through a series of smaller compromises. Small enough to justify, small enough to explain, small enough to ignore, at least at first. But there is something people rarely understand. Every compromise leaves a mark, not always on the outside, often on the inside. And over time, those marks become calluses. The nature of a callus. A callus forms when something experiences repeated pressure. The skin adapts. What once felt painful becomes normal. What once felt uncomfortable becomes familiar. The same thing happens psychologically. The same thing happens morally. The same thing happens spiritually. A person can become accustomed to things they once would have rejected. Not because they changed overnight, because they adapted gradually. The first compromise. The first compromise is usually the hardest. The first lie. The first excuse. The first abandonment of discipline. The first betrayal of personal standards. There's tension, discomfort, resistance. Something inside pushes back. But then something interesting happens. If the compromise is repeated, the resistance becomes weaker. The quieting of the inner voice. Most people have experienced this. There was a time when something felt wrong. Not illegal, not dramatic, just wrong. A subtle discomfort, a warning, a hesitation. But after enough repetition, the warning became quieter. Eventually it disappeared altogether. The person assumes growth occurred. Sometimes what actually occurred was desensitization. Those are not the same thing. The dangerous misinterpretation. People often mistake the absence of discomfort for the presence of wisdom. But they're different. A person can stop feeling resistance without becoming better. In fact, they can become worse. Because calluses reduce sensitivity. And reduced sensitivity changes behavior. The financial version. This appears in finances constantly. The first unnecessary debt feels uncomfortable. The 10th feels normal. The first impulse purchase feels questionable. The 100th feels routine. The first month without saving creates concern. Years later, it becomes expected. People slowly adapt to financial behaviors that work against them. Not because those behaviors improved, because their sensitivity declined. The expansion of justification. Humans possess an extraordinary ability. The ability to justify almost anything, given enough repetition. Eventually people stop asking, "Is this wise?" and begin asking, "Can I explain it?" Those are very different questions. One seeks truth. The other seeks permission. The spiritual dimension. Now we move deeper. There is a reason ancient wisdom traditions repeatedly warn about the condition of the heart. Not because people suddenly become corrupt, because repeated choices shape perception. A person can gradually lose the ability to recognize what they are becoming. Not through rebellion, through familiarity. The path rarely begins in darkness. It begins in indifference, the erosion of awareness. The greatest danger is not always wrongdoing. Sometimes it is unconsciousness, living without examination, without reflection, without self-correction, without asking, "Who am I becoming?" Because if that question disappears, almost any direction begins to feel acceptable. The small drift principle. Most people overestimate dramatic events. They underestimate gradual drift. 1 degree of deviation seems insignificant. Over years, it changes destinations entirely. The same principle applies to character. The same principle applies to finances. The same principle applies to purpose. Small deviations become large distances. Given enough time, the return of sensitivity. Fortunately, calluses can be removed, but not through comfort, through awareness, through honesty, through reflection. The process is often uncomfortable, because things once ignored become visible again. Things once justified become difficult to defend. But discomfort is not always a sign of damage. Sometimes it is a sign that feeling is returning. The mirror question. There's a question worth asking occasionally. Not what do I believe? Not what do I say? Not what do I intend? But What have my repeated actions been teaching me to become? That question reaches deeper than most people expect, because habits reveal realities that words often conceal. Final words from Mr. Sticks. Most people fear pain, but sometimes the greater danger is the absence of it, because pain often signals awareness. Calluses signal adaptation, and adaptation is not always improvement. So here's your directive. Pay attention to what no longer bothers you. Pay attention to what no longer challenges you. Pay attention to what you have quietly accepted, because the things you repeatedly tolerate eventually shape the person you become. And not every loss arrives with a warning. Sometimes it arrives as silence. If this framework made you uncomfortable, don't rush to dismiss it. Sit with it for a while. Some truths are not meant to be consumed quickly. They are meant to be examined carefully. More frameworks are coming. And as we move deeper, the conversation becomes less about what you have and more about what you are becoming. Shalom.